My own mother abandoned me at an airport when I was just 8 years old, no warning, no goodbye, just a backpack and a lie I'd spend years untangling. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I was holding my mom's hand at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, thinking we were going on a trip. She told me to sit on a bench and wait while she checked something. I believed her. I watched people rush by, expecting her face to return at any moment. Minutes turned into hours. Fear grew heavy in my chest. When airport staff came over, I finally understood she wasn't coming back. Child Protective Services stepped in, and I was placed with the Keller family. They were strict but kind, and they tried to help me feel safe again. Still, I carried the pain of being unwanted. When I was 12, I overheard that my mom had taken money to give up her rights. It wasn't an accident or panic. She chose to walk away. As I grew older, the hurt hardened into determination. At 20, I learned she was living in Arizona under a new name. I drove there, shaking the whole way. When I finally saw her, she barely recognized me. She admitted she left because she wanted a life without a child holding her back. Hearing that broke something inside me, but it also gave me strength. I reported her for the fraud she'd been hiding. Watching her face consequences didn't make me happy, but it made me free. I went home knowing her choices no longer controlled my life. I finally chose myself. Marin had been different from the moment we left the house that morning. I didn't have the words for it then, but now I can picture it clearly, the way her fingers tapped against her purse, how she kept glancing around as if someone was watching her. She barely spoke, and when she did, her voice sounded tight, like she was forcing every word out. I tried to hold her hand the way I always did, but she slipped away from my touch, pretending she needed both hands for her luggage. When we reached the busy terminal, she leaned down and told me we were heading somewhere new. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I felt a strange pressure in my stomach, though I didn't understand why. She guided me toward a row of seats near a small cafe and told me to sit. Her instructions were firm, sharper than usual. She told me not to wander, not to stand, not to move until she returned. I nodded because that's what children do. We trust. She gave one last look over her shoulder. It wasn't warm or loving. It was almost guilty, though I didn't recognize that feeling at 8 years old. Then she walked into the stream of travelers and blended in so easily. I kept waiting, staring in the direction she'd gone, expecting to see her familiar shape appear again. Instead, the minutes stretched out in slow, painful lines. People came and went, but she didn't. The noise of the airport faded until all I could hear was my own breathing. I kept telling myself she'd be back any second. I hugged my small bag to my chest and held on to that hope as long as I could. But as time kept passing, the quiet inside me turned into something sharp and cold. That was the beginning of the truth I didn't yet understand. The longer I sat there, the harder it became to hold myself together. I tried to blink away the tears, hoping no one would notice, but eventually a woman in a navy uniform stopped beside me. She crouched down, asking gentle questions I couldn't answer without my voice shaking. When she realized I was alone, she signaled for another worker. Their faces shifted from concern to urgency as they guided me to a quieter corner away from the steady rush of travelers. They asked if I knew where my mother went. I shook my head over and over, clutching the small backpack I had brought with me. When they asked what was inside, I opened it, hoping it would help somehow. All it held were a few folded shirts, a half-smashed granola bar, and a single document with my name on it. No wallet. No phone. No ticket. Nothing that explained why I was there without the person who brought me. The staff exchanged looks I didn't yet know how to read. One of them stepped aside to make a call, speaking in a low voice. Another sat with me, trying to keep me calm by asking about things like school and favorite colors, but every question made my chest tighten more. I could feel something was very wrong, even if the pieces didn't make sense yet. When officers arrived, they approached with careful movements, not wanting to frighten me further. They asked about my morning, how I ended up sitting alone, and when I last saw the woman who brought me. As they pieced together what I couldn't understand, their expressions confirmed a truth I wasn't ready for. They weren't looking for her nearby. They were treating the situation as deliberate. Soon after, I was escorted away from the terminal and placed in the care of people who handled situations like mine. I didn't know the name of the agency or what it meant for my future. All I knew was that the person who was supposed to stay with me had chosen to walk away. The drive to the house felt endless, and I sat in the back seat gripping my seatbelt like it was the only stable thing I had left. When we finally pulled into a quiet neighborhood, I saw a small brick home with a trimmed yard and a porch light that glowed softly. Waiting at the door were the two people who would become the center of this next chapter, Brant and Evie Keller. They greeted me with cautious warmth, speaking gently, as if afraid too much kindness might make me crumble. Inside, everything felt unfamiliar. The air smelled like laundry soap and cinnamon, a sharp contrast to the chaos I had just come from. Evie showed me a small bedroom with pale yellow walls and a patchwork quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed. Brad carried my tiny bag in, setting it down carefully, even though it held barely anything. They didn't push me to talk. They didn't force a smile out of me. They simply let me exist. Days slowly fell into a new pattern. Evie woke early and made breakfast, placing a plate in front of me even when I barely touched it. Brant drove me to school, speaking only when I seemed ready to listen. They set rules, bedtime, chores, homework, but none of it felt harsh. It felt steady. Safe, in a way I didn't know how to trust. But safety didn't silence the things inside me. I woke often with my heart racing, convinced someone had vanished again. Each shadow in the hallway felt like a warning. Each time a door closed, I braced for emptiness. Even when the Kellers reassured me with calm voices and steady presence, part of me stayed on alert, certain everything could disappear without warning. They kept showing up, though. Every morning, every evening, every quiet moment when fear pressed against my ribs. And little by little, their consistency became something I could lean on, even if I still carried a wound I didn't know how to name. I was 12 when the truth slipped into my life without warning. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, one of those days when the air feels still and nothing seems important. I was walking past the kitchen when I heard my name spoken in a low voice. Brant and Evie were talking to a woman from the agency who had come by for a routine visit. I didn't mean to listen, but once the words reached me, I couldn't move. The woman mentioned documents, the kind adults whisper about when they think children won't understand. She said Marin had willingly signed away her role, that she hadn't vanished out of fear or confusion. My stomach tightened as I waited for someone to correct her, to say she was mistaken. No one did. Then came the part that made my breath catch. The visitor explained that Marin had received money to walk away. Not from strangers, but from relatives who didn't want responsibility and preferred to solve the problem quietly. They didn't want me, and Marin didn't fight for me. She simply agreed and left. A cold heaviness spread through me. I had always imagined some complicated reason behind what happened, anything other than choice. I thought maybe she was scared, or lost, or sick. But learning it had been arranged, planned, traded, it hollowed something inside me. I backed away before they noticed me listening. I went to my room and sat on the floor, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. The walls felt too close, and breathing hurt. I kept replaying the idea that my place in her life had been something she could hand off like an item she no longer needed. That was the moment the last piece of innocence broke. I finally understood that what happened to me wasn't an accident. It was an agreement, signed, paid for, and carried out without hesitation. The years that followed shaped me in ways I didn't fully recognize at the time. I threw myself into schoolwork because books and numbers made sense when people didn't. Structure gave me a place to put all the anger I didn't know how to release. While other kids drifted in groups, laughing and sharing secrets, I stayed on the edges. It wasn't that I disliked them. I just couldn't let myself rely on anyone. Trust felt like a trap I couldn't risk falling into again. Teachers praised my focus, but they never saw the force behind it, the pressure inside me that pushed harder whenever memories of that day surfaced. I learned to appear calm, to speak politely, to follow every rule. But underneath, resentment grew like a slow-burning fire. Every time I imagined Maren living comfortably somewhere, untouched by what she'd done, my jaw tightened. The idea that she had walked away so easily, signed her name and accepted payment for my absence, stayed with me like a shadow. I never spoke about those feelings, not even to the Kellers. They offered stability, but some wounds heal only on the outside. I promised myself that if the chance came, I would face the person who caused all of this. It wasn't about understanding her motives or searching for forgiveness. It was about making sure she knew the consequences of her actions. She had made a choice that shaped my entire childhood, and I wanted her to see what that choice created. As I entered my later teens, that intent became a steady force guiding me. I worked, studied, saved, and prepared in quiet ways. I didn't know when or how our paths would cross again, but I carried a certainty that it would happen. And when it did, I wouldn't be the helpless child she left behind. By the time I turned 20, life had settled into a steady rhythm I built for myself. I was juggling community college classes during the day and long shifts at a small auto shop in the evenings. The work was tiring, but it kept my mind busy and helped me save money. I didn't expect anything to disrupt that routine, especially not a voice from my past. One afternoon, while wiping grease from my hands, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. When I answered, I heard the soft, aging voice of a former caseworker who had been involved in my early years after the abandonment. She told me she was retiring and wanted to reach out before closing her files for good. Her tone carried a mix of hesitation and sympathy, the kind people use when they're about to say something delicate. She explained that during her last review of old records, she came across information that might matter to me. She didn't share every detail, careful not to overstep, but she offered a clue, a location where Maren had been seen years earlier. She mentioned a town in Arizona, a quiet place surrounded by mountains and pine trees. The name felt strange on my tongue, Flagstaff. Then she mentioned something that made my pulse quicken. Maren wasn't using the name I grew up with. She had taken another one, a choice that didn't surprise me but still sent a tight ache through my chest. The caseworker didn't know if she still lived there, but it was the first real direction I'd ever been given. When the call ended, I stood alone in the back of the shop, staring at the dust floating in the sunlight. For years, I had imagined someday finding her, but I never expected the opportunity to appear so plainly. That faint lead, that single hint, lit something inside me. It wasn't hope. It was resolve, quiet, steady, and impossible to ignore. Once I had that small thread to follow, sitting still was impossible. I arranged time away from the shop, knowing I wouldn't get paid for the missed days but feeling certain the trip mattered more than my bank account. I packed lightly, just a few essentials, and slid behind the wheel of my old car before the sun climbed into the sky. The engine hummed, steady and familiar, as if pushing me forward. The road stretched for hours, then days, carrying me through long highways, dusty towns, and empty stretches where the landscape blurred into shades of brown and gold. With each passing mile, my thoughts grew louder. A tight knot formed inside me, part dread, part fire. I tried to steady my breathing, but the closer I got to the state line, the harder it became to quiet the storm building in my chest. At night, I stopped at small motels, lying awake and staring at ceilings stained by time. I wondered what I would say if I actually found her. I wondered if she would deny everything or pretend not to remember. Sometimes anger pushed those questions aside, sharp and hot. Other times, something gentler crept in, something I didn't want to name. Maybe it was the part of me that had spent so long wishing for answers. When I finally reached Arizona, the air felt thinner, cooler. The tall trees and wide skies made the world feel unfamiliar, but I kept going. I spent hours in quiet offices, combing through public records, searching for traces of the name she had taken. Each small match drew me further in. Piece by piece, the trail led me toward a life she had built far away from the one she left behind. And with every step, I felt the weight of the moment that waited ahead, one I had been moving toward for most of my life. The diner was small, tucked between a gas station and a dusty stretch of road, with the smell of coffee and frying eggs hanging in the air. I slid into a booth near the window, pretending to browse the menu, though I barely looked at it. My eyes were fixed on the woman behind the counter, moving with practiced ease, wiping tables and taking orders. She looked ordinary, worn in ways that life leaves on people who avoid looking back. It took a moment before her face registered anything familiar. I spoke my name softly at first, testing the reaction. Her movements froze, and she turned slowly. Recognition flickered across her eyes, then vanished into disbelief. I didn't rush, didn't shout. I simply said, "Why?" She swallowed hard, looking anywhere but at me. Her voice was quieter than I expected. I wanted a life without a child holding me back, she admitted. There was no excuse, no hesitation to soften the words, just the flat truth of her choice. I felt a strange calm settle over me, even as my chest burned. All the years of anger, of plotting, of imagining this moment, condensed into that single sentence. I wanted to shake her, to demand more, but something inside me kept my hand still. I wanted her words, her acknowledgement, nothing else. She tried to add something else, some murmur about circumstances or necessity, but I cut through it with steady eyes. I had heard enough. Every detail of my childhood she had left behind was accounted for in that one sentence. She had chosen, and now, finally, I had the proof I needed. For the first time, I saw the full shape of her decision and how it had defined my life. And I knew, without a doubt, that nothing she said next could change it. Her words hit like ice. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and told me she did what she had to do, as if abandoning me had been nothing more than a practical decision. She looked at me with pleading eyes, asking me not to ruin her new life, as though my very existence threatened her comfort. In that moment, I saw clearly that she felt no remorse, no sorrow for the years she had stolen from me. There was only irritation that I had shown up, forcing her to confront something she had buried so easily. The realization cut deeper than any anger I had carried before. This wasn't just neglect, it was deliberate, calculated, and free of conscience. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of disbelief and rage swirling inside me. How could someone look at the life they shattered and only care about themselves? How could she ask for protection while leaving a trail of pain behind? I stayed still, letting her words sink in, letting her see that I understood everything. This wasn't about reconciliation or understanding anymore, it was about witnessing the truth of her character. I had imagined this moment countless times, and yet the reality was sharper, colder than any scenario I had built in my mind. Her casual dismissal, her lack of shame, crystallized the years of hurt I had carried alone. The betrayal wasn't abstract anymore, it was alive in front of me, staring back without apology. For the first time I understood fully that she had never loved me in any way that mattered. That truth, raw and undeniable, marked the point where my focus shifted entirely, from longing for acknowledgement to demanding justice for the life she had discarded. After leaving the diner, I couldn't stop thinking about everything she had said. The anger and betrayal were still there, but now I had clarity. I began quietly gathering information, searching public records, court documents, and small mentions of her in local reports. Piece by piece, a pattern emerged. She had been living under different names, avoiding bills, skipping responsibilities, and creating a life built on deception. I didn't hesitate. I contacted the proper authorities, leaving detailed reports and evidence anonymously. I knew I had no obligation to protect her. She had chosen this path long before I ever reappeared in her life. Every warning I included, every fact I submitted, was meant to ensure that she faced the consequences of her choices, not out of spite but to hold her accountable. There was a strange weight lifted in doing it. For years, I had carried the chaos she left behind like it was mine to fix. Now, I could step back and let the truth take its course. The law would recognize the pattern she had hidden for so long. I didn't gloat, I didn't celebrate. I simply allowed myself to feel a quiet satisfaction. Justice wasn't about revenge in the way I had imagined as a child, it was about balance. She had disrupted a life she once promised to protect, and now the world would see her actions reflected back. For the first time I understood the power of choice. She had acted without regard for me, and now her choices were meeting consequences she could no longer escape. I could finally breathe, knowing I had done what was necessary, and that the future I was building would no longer be threatened by her past. In the weeks after everything unfolded, I spent a lot of time alone, processing the storm that had finally settled. Watching her face the consequences did not fill the hollow I had carried for years. The anger I thought would bring relief turned out to be only a tool. It showed me what needed to end, but it could not heal the wound itself. I began meeting with a therapist, someone patient and steady who helped me untangle the years of self-blame I had held on to. Slowly, I confronted the belief that I was unworthy of care, that being abandoned meant something was wrong with me. I learned that her choices reflected her own failings, not mine, and that realization opened a door I hadn't dared to push open before. Day by day, I started building routines that were truly mine. I explored new hobbies, connected with people I felt safe with, and allowed myself small joys without guilt. I practiced self-respect, recognizing my worth independently of the life I had been handed or the betrayals I had endured. For the first time, I could feel a quiet strength growing inside me, not fueled by anger, but by clarity and choice. Accountability had been served, but closure was something I claimed for myself. It wasn't about forgetting the past or excusing it, it was about stepping forward without it controlling me. In that space, I realized I was capable of more than survival. I could thrive. I could choose who I allowed into my life and what I allowed to define me. And for the first time, I felt the fragile but unmistakable warmth of freedom that came from taking back my story entirely. When I finally returned to Texas, the familiar streets felt different, almost welcoming in a way they never had before. The air seemed lighter, as if the weight I had carried for years had stayed behind somewhere along the journey. I didn't feel the old tension that made every step uncertain. For the first time, I could walk without constantly watching for someone to vanish from my life. I began building a life on my own terms. I moved to a new neighborhood, met people who shared my interests, and allowed myself to form connections slowly, carefully. I took a job that challenged me and offered opportunities one had dreamed about but never dared pursue. Each decision felt like a brick in the foundation of a future I was shaping, not one dictated by fear or betrayal. The past didn't vanish, and I didn't pretend it had. Instead, I carried it as a reminder of resilience, of the lessons learned from every painful moment. I no longer let her choices dictate how I felt about myself. I realized that closure wasn't about forgiving someone who had hurt me, it was about reclaiming control over my own life, refusing to let her absence or betrayal define my worth. Every morning became a choice, to embrace strength instead of sorrow, to welcome possibility instead of dread. Slowly, life filled with quiet triumphs and small joys, each one reinforcing the fact that I was no longer a child left behind. I had stepped into my own story fully, and for the first time, the horizon ahead felt entirely mine to shape.